ADHD, it's more of a thinking impairment. Do this in order to get to the outcome. What this program is designed to identify the individual executive functions and how they work individually and collectively, and to accommodate the process of thinking to get to the outcome, not to get your brain to do what we want it to get to an outcome. So it's a completely change in how we go about solving the problem. It's about what accommodation that we can do to fit it to your brain. Little things like that, where you begin to realize how much ADHD is a thinking impairment, then you begin to realize accommodations like just having somebody ask you questions actually helps a person, not everybody, with ADHD think through some things. Having somebody do that stuff can make it cognitively easier, as opposed to when thinking's really, really difficult, there's an urge to go escape to do something else because it's difficult. So again, the program is designed to help people to kind of see that from the inside out and begin to problem solve.
Welcome to Successful with ADHD. I'm Brooke Schnittman. Let's get started. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Successful with ADHD. Today, I want to re-welcome my friend and colleague, Jeff Copper. He is an ADHD and attention coach, and he has a lot of letters next to his name: MBA, PCC, PCAC, CPCC, ACG. I don't even know what half of these stand for, but I'm sure he'll explain that to us. And after this episode, he might even have some more letters next to his name. Today, we're going to be talking about fitting the task to your brain and ADHD intervention. So we're actually going to be talking, for those of you who've listened to Jeff's episodes on Successful with ADHD in the past, you'll hear that he shared a lot of tools and a lot of insight on the ADHD brain about boredom and tools to strategize on that. And today we're going to discuss a new tool that he has created and is sharing with the ADHD and neurodivergent space. And just a little bit more about Jeff. He is the founder of Dig Coaching, and he's the host and founder of Attention Talk Radio and Attention Talk Video. Jeff coaches individuals and entrepreneurs with ADHD symptoms who are seeking to improve their personal and business results. Welcome back, Jeff.
Thank you so much, Brooke. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you letting me come on and talk about this today. It's an honor.
Absolutely. And so without further ado, I'm going to open up the floor to you.
Okay.
Both you and I are ADHD coaches. We've been in the biz for a while, and now you have this tool.
Let's call it a lens. Let's call it a lens.
A lens.
Yeah.
A lens. Tell me a little bit more about it, and how does it work with or without coaching?
Sure. Well, a few things first. Number one, Brooke, you're a thought leader in this space, and allowing me to come on here, I really appreciate it. I do want to explain a new intervention, and I want to explain it. I want to explain what it is and how it works. And I want, like everybody else, you can judge it on its own merit. If you don't think it makes any sense, that's fine. But I just want to explain, I've got a new intervention for ADHD, a new way of looking at it. I want to explain the background behind it and why it may or may not make sense. I also, a disclaimer on this. I have found this program to be exceptionally helpful. It has cut my coaching time by 70%. However, it is not for everybody. I'm not walking out trying to say this is a panacea. The people that struggle with emotions or struggle with objective observations, the ones that can't override their feelings, this probably is not going to make any sense to you. But if you have a very engineering type mindset and you're okay with making objective observations, it can be really, really helpful. So that's all the disclaimers. And I just want to make sure I want to share this to people to judge it on its own merit.
So before you continue on, I just want to break that down for a second. So for people who are struggling with emotional regulation, they need to get that in check first before doing something like this? Or is this out of the question?
Look at it like this. The program will help prove to them why making a phone call isn't easy. Okay? If I go through the program and I help them understand what's going on, but they still judge a phone call to be easy, even though they're not making it, that's a situation where their beliefs and their emotions are overriding the objective fact. The fact is you're putting it off. By definition, it's hard. If you can't see that and accept it, the person's not going to be able to apply the model and understand it because their emotions are overriding the ability to make objective observations. Does that make sense?
Sure.
That's a
Sure.
key distinction that people think they're objective, but it's real important. So what I'd like to do is kind of explain in an abstract way, in a tangible way, what this is really all about. Years ago, people would get sick, and there's really nothing we could do, right? We didn't know what we were
Mm-hmm.
looking for, and we couldn't see it. Well, along came the microscope. That became a lens to make observations. And we figured out that if we paid attention to viruses and germs, those were the drivers of illnesses. So once we had defined what we were looking for and we had a lens to view it, we can now problem solve. Okay? So if there's a bacterial infection, we can give it penicillin. In any
Mm-hmm.
other field of engineering, you've got to have some type of definition of what you're paying attention to, and you've got to have some type of lens in order to observe what you've defined. What I've
Mm-hmm.
done is I've taken Dr. Barkley's model of executive function, and you and I have talked about that before. I've come on and done a couple of conversations. I think we
Mm-hmm.
did on one on working memory and some other ones. I believe that model has repeatable patterns and can be explained. It explains itself if you really understand it. You'll understand the individual components. You'll understand how they conflict with each other, how they interact, and it can give you some really kind of amazing insights. The problem historically has been, how do you see it? How do you see the individual
Mm-hmm.
executive functions? What I've developed is something called attention scope. Attention scope is a collection of metaphors and simulated experiences that I put people in to bring tangibility for them to recognize each executive function individually and collectively.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I did an interview a while back on working memory, and I asked you to repeat 6 words back to me in alphabetical order. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
simulation because when people define working memory, they have an idea of it, but in that exercise, I gave it to you, so you had to load that into your mind and you had to manipulate it in order to get it in alphabetical order. And I don't remember it specifically with you, but most people with ADHD have difficulty with that.
Sure, I do.
When I put people in that thing, I'm like, this is what we're talking about. You're having difficulty with it. And you'll notice is that this is an impairment. ADHD is really an impairment. Like, behavior is changeable. Like,
Mm-hmm.
impairments require accommodation. So my eyesight is impaired. If I wear the
Mm-hmm.
glasses, I can see. So at
Mm-hmm.
the end of the day, the program that I've developed is called Cognitive Ergonomics from the Inside Out. And it's
Mm-hmm.
basically a training program to teach people to use the definitions of Dr. Barkley's model and attention scope in order for them to make objective, factual observations so that they can problem solve like an engineer would. In the
Hmm.
engineering world, there's this thing called Six Sigma. It's a problem-solving methodology. There's the 5 whys, the fishbone diagram, etc. But it's a methodology where you sit down and you define what the problem is, you define what the root cause is, and then you problem solve towards that goal.
So, does someone who does this or who's a candidate for it, is it someone who would have strong metacognitive skills ahead of time?
That it would be helpful, but we're going to put you in simulations in order to kind of help you pay attention to what to notice. And I'll give
Mm-hmm.
you an example here in a second. So it's an observational training program. Again, what's unique about it that's different is we've defined what to look for, not emotions and not observable behavior, but we've defined the executive functions. We've given you a lens in order to see it, and we put you in experiences. So for example, one of the things that we do is I'll have somebody prepare a meal, consume
Mm-hmm.
a meal, and clean up a meal using their less dominant hand.
Mm.
Now, in that simulation, and let me pause here for a second. The program, you have to have specialized training in order to use the attention scope, which I'm going to come back to in a second. When I give that to people, people are like, wow, that was really awkward, or I was really, really frustrated. Now, those are emotional observations from that experience.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of it is, when you did you notice that you had to be self-aware? Yeah, like
Sure.
every moment of the exercise. Did you notice that you got frustrated? You had to downregulate your emotions because this was not something that's normal. Did you notice that you had to restrain yourself to override your urge to use the dominant hand? Did you notice that you had to use your visual imagery because when you were cutting with the knife left-handed, which is not something you were doing, you're trying to visualize it right, and you're trying to do it on your left hand, and so that you were doing that, did you notice maybe that you were having to think to yourself about what you were doing, and did you notice the cognitive strain that was taking place because you were having to do a lot more thinking? And did you notice maybe that you forgot different things at different times of the way because the cognitive load was high? The simulation is designed to say, did you see self-awareness? Did you see the emotional regulation? Did you see self-restraint? Did you see visual imagery? So the idea is I put people in that experience. And what's fun is most people, not everybody, will end up, they had a good plan, but they start to shortcut it as time goes on. If you take a look at that's ADD behavior, you're trying to get out of it. And so by putting people in these particular simulations, we don't talk about executive functions collectively. Like a lot of executive functions coaches are going to teach skills. Do this in order to get to the outcome. What this program is designed is to identify the individual executive functions and how they work individually and collectively, and to accommodate the process of thinking to get to the outcome, not to get your brain to do what we want it to get to an outcome. So it's really it's a completely change in how we go about solving the problem. It's not about doing it this way. It's about what accommodation that we can do to fit it to your brain.
Gotcha. So for the person who's going through that simulation and they're noticing it was hard for them to cut with their left hand, you're probing them with the questions. They're noticing this, they're noticing that. Now, what are they doing with that? Are they now taking those executive dysfunctions, so to say, and comparing that to how they're functioning in the real world?
So first of all, we have to define what to look at. So what we said was executive functions. You don't know what it is, but now I'm putting you in experience so that you can begin to recognize them individually. Like now that you know what they are. As we go through and we break each one down and we go through the mechanics of each one. So we just talked about, that's a general one. One of the simulations we do is on working memory is the 6 words, and there's a bunch of others. So now we've broken all down in the components individually and collectively. Then what we do is we start to take a look at how certain executive functions actually conflict with each other. Okay? To be self-aware, you've got to regulate your emotions. To regulate your emotions, you got to be self-aware. One of the problems is self-awareness is you have to be vulnerable. You have to see yourself as you are. The thing about emotional regulation is when you feel threatened, you reflexively fight back. So when I can explain to somebody is that your problem with self-awareness is you don't want to see yourself because it's threatening to you. Some people are like, they don't get it, but other people, when I can make the conflict vivid and they can see it playing out in their day, they're actually able to pause and see that happen and recognize that they're fighting it. And that's what's kind of getting in the way. Because again, the nature of the two of them is they actually conflict. There's a lot of people out there who know a lot about ADHD, but they still suffer. You know, Brooke, I know you've worked with a lot of people, even yourself. The people that survive, that thrive, are the ones that own their ADHD. Like it's an impairment. I need to do the accommodation. There's that piece of it. So part of the model also helps people begin to understand what works, like 100% all the time. And often what works is something that people don't want to emotionally admit to. So we'll help them begin to see what works from an accommodation perspective. And I know this is getting kind of complicated, but we'll also begin to, when the person can see their emotional reaction when they're trying to be self-awareness, what we took was a feeling that was intangible, and now they can see it kind of playing out in their head. And for the people that are more, oh my God, I get this mechanically, they now have taken the emotion out of it and they're seeing it as an objective mechanical thing, not an emotional subjective thing. And for the ones that have that mindset, they activate often just on the knowledge of knowing the inner workings of the interplay of the executive functions. Does this make some sense?
Sure. Yeah. So it's the awareness piece that's helping them to activate their potential, essentially. Like, what move do it's like a chess game, right? So now I know all the pieces, the potential moves in my brain. Now what do I do with that?
So one of the things that the model bears out that's fascinating is ADHD is far more of a thinking impairment than most people want to recognize and admit. And the challenge of ADHD, anything that's multifaceted and ambiguous is the definition of something that's difficult for people with ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
If it's multifaceted and ambiguous.
Sure.
When I gave you those 6 words on the other thing and said, repeat it back to me in alphabetical order, that wasn't, it was multifaceted, but not very, and it wasn't as ambiguous, and that was a bit of a challenge. So as the multifaceted goes up and the ambiguity goes up, the more intense it becomes. So what the model begins to show, people with ADHD are really as intelligent as anybody else. However, they need accommodations for the thinking process, whether they're talking out loud or having somebody ask them questions. And so when we can begin to isolate this and define with specificity what thinking is, and by the way, we do different things with thoughts. We're not talking about worrying. We're not talking about emoting. We're not talking about learning. We're not talking about judging. We're not talking about contemplative thinking. The impairment is strictly when it comes to problem solving. We define methodical thinking, trial and error thinking, and insightful thinking. When you understand those different components and you understand like time, you'll understand why the Pomodoro technique is really good for methodical thinking, but it's the wrong thing for you to use for insightful thinking. So by breaking this down, the situational variables of what you've got going on in your own brain, is you're no longer guessing. You're actually learning to derive your own equation, if you will. Like a tip or a trick is like, here's the Pythagorean theorem. It's a great equation, but you might be applying it to the wrong problem. The program allows you to derive an equation that makes sense for you in your situation.
Sure. So can you give us an example of a person's situation going through the program and, how they came out on the other side from it?
Oh, wow. Okay. There's what I call booting up of the working memory, right? When you sit down and you sit at a computer, you've got to boot it up. The operating system needs to kind of come up and all the tools come up in order for you to do that. When you're going to sit down and do a task that's cognitive, there's a boot up process that goes on in your head. There's the loading of that information. It's very effortful. Okay. What people with ADHD will say, I'm having a hard time getting in the flow. Once I'm in the flow, I'm good. I'm having a hard time. This is what we're talking about. This is the boot up process. By acknowledging it's booting up and it's effortful, it takes time. Number one, there's a few things that happens. Number one, now that you realize what it is cognitively, you begin to plan that as a part of any task. Like if you're not acknowledging that piece of it and you're not planning for it or scheduling it, you're ignoring part of the equation. Now that you know that it's there, you're actually now planning for it. Also, when you're doing something like that and you're booting up in the process and you get into the flow, understand that if you get interrupted, it's like your computer got unplugged. You literally, if you get distracted, you have to come back and you have to start all over again. And by metaphorically explaining that what's going on, and you've got a cognitive project, number one, you need to plan for the boot up. And number two, you need to make sure that you got runway where you're not going to get interrupted so that you can get started and not be interrupted. Okay. Now, as an aside, there's different components of this. When you understand the booting up process, the issue really is you can boot up or you begin to watch your own behavior and say, oh, when did I get into the flow real quickly? Because there's situational variables when it works that enables you to do that. So for me, when I'm coaching clients, every client's a different project. And I'll have a conversation with somebody last week. And if I don't do anything the following week, I won't really have a clue because it's too effortful for me to understand what's going on. Whereas if I dictate a stream of consciousness after my last call, now it's not organized, it's just my thoughts in that moment. And I listen to it before they call. Hearing myself talk about my own thoughts is like taking my, I don't have to boot all the way up. It's just taking it out of hibernation.
It's like a screenshot of that picture of what happened previously.
Yeah. By understanding the boot up process and understand what's going on and understand your own behavior, you can begin to say, okay, here's the shortcuts that I can go through to make this quicker. Or a lot of this program was a lot of heavy thinking. And I would literally call up my assistants and I'd say, listen, I'm going to talk about what I've been doing. I'm talking about what I hope to accomplish today. And by verbalizing that, that would help me get into the flow. So one, by defining that element of the boot up process of working memory, understanding what it is, and then looking for the successes in my life where I got there quicker, I can begin to understand what my recipe is in order to get that. So it's not a guess. I'm actually looking at my own instinctive behavior in order to understand what works.
You're looking at data.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
You're looking at the data.
Okay.
But I'm giving
Okay.
the definitions, or bringing the tangibility to it so that you can look at the data, not the emotions, to solve the problem.
Yeah. So I am all about different scopes, different tools, whatever you would
Yep.
like to call it, right? Like therapy, medication, coaching, potentially the attention scope. And I would love to get my hands on it and check it out. It sounds wonderful. So if we were to add this to our toolbox, right, for someone who wants to look at the data, someone who wants to be reflective so they can cut down the time to do something because they
Yep.
know what it takes to get into that flow state or to get into a productive workflow. How does this compare for the people who don't know, who haven't been coached or who haven't gone through the attention scope? How does it compare? I know with coaching, we look to move the client forward, right? But how does it compare to coaching in the sense of reflection? Just so for people can like, so I'm trying to understand that too.
One of the challenges of understanding this is you're looking, like, metaphorically, it's like the people that are listening to this metaphorically, it's like you're looking through the lens and you understand the world to be flat. I now have a tool that can help you see that it's actually round. The challenge of this is it's so conceptually different. You're listening to the words and you're trying to relate it to a flat world, and it's not. It's actually a completely different paradigm.
So it's apples and oranges.
I say it's an engineering approach because, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's like nobody's actually been able to define executive functions in a way we know what we were looking at, and nobody had a tool to bring tangibility so that we could actually see it. We now have those two technologies that we've never had before. And by the way, systems engineering is a field of engineering, like mechanical engineering or chemical engineering or bio.
Mm-hmm.
It's a field within industrial or systems engineering. There's a subfield called ergonomics. Ergonomics is
Mm-hmm.
about fitting the job to the person. So
Mm-hmm.
physical ergonomics were pretty advanced. So we have chairs that we adjust for the height and situation of the person. There is an area called cognitive ergonomics, but it's from the outside in. People are
Mm-hmm.
guessing what happens to happen. What's different about this is falling under the field of cognitive ergonomics, but the individual could never participate before because they didn't know what to look at.
Mm.
So in a sense, I'm also saying that this is a new field of engineering that we've never had before because we've never had the technology to make observations, to make factual observations. And the program is not called ADHD ergonomics. It's cognitive ergonomics from the inside out. It's not something that would work very well for schizophrenic or maybe some autism, stuff like that. But this will work for neurotypicals just as well as it is for ADHD. The same executive functions are executive functions. It applies both ways. I'd like to get it into the neurotypical world at a point in time, but it's easier for me to go to the ADD world for proof of concept because they're the ones that's in need and it can apply to more. So going back to the original question, I've had therapists go through this, coaches go through that, parents and stuff, and it's really helping you understand more about what you can see from a mechanical place. And the coaches that have done it have said, it's really helped me ask more powerful questions because if I'm asking a person a question and they're changing the subject, they're recognizing is that the person is escaping the question because it's cognitively difficult. Like,
Sure.
and part of ADHD, part of this is you can begin to recognize is when more people will give you like, I'm going to go do this, and you can begin to recognize is that actually. Let me tell a story. See if I can do this. I'm mentor coaching a bunch of other coaches, and I'm coaching one
Mm-hmm.
individual in particular about how this person needs to ask for the coaching topic earlier in the call. We had
Mm-hmm.
covered it before. We're covering it again. And
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, how are you going to remember to do that? And the person said, I'm going to put a Post-it on my computer.
Mm-hmm.
I let the conversation change for a minute or two. And I came back and I said, let's come back here. I said, can you give me a real answer to that question instead of an emotional response? And she was like, what do you mean? I said, that was an emotional response. There was no thinking involved. She said, what? I said, what'd you say? I want to put a Post-it on my computer to remind me. I said, how many Post-its do you have? I don't know, like 20. I said, do you ever look at them? Light bulbs went off in that moment. And here's the subtlety. Is reflexively, she said, I'm going to put a Post-it on the computer. If you understand ADHD, it's more of a thinking impairment. She didn't actually sit there and think, is that actually going to work? She didn't sit and kind of go through the thinking process to realize that it probably wasn't going to be something that was going to happen. She said it got her out of it, but she didn't do the kind of deep thinking that she needed to do to say, does this really work?
But she didn't have the questions in between that time to think differently. Like maybe the Post-it in the past has worked. Of course, if you have 20 Post-its on your computer, you're probably not going to know which one to look at or avoid them. But
the point of it is she put it up there and she didn't think about her behavior and stuff. Has that ever really worked in the past? Has it gone to a deeper level? Now,
gotcha.
now this is what the model can begin to explain, is that you can put something on your to-do list. That's okay, but that's not where the impairment is. The impairment is actually thinking through what you got to do on the list. So, for example, I had a guy I was coaching one time, and like, I need to send my mom a Mother's Day card. Okay. Now, again, I'm going to say cued recall is an accommodation. It's a cued recall. And what I said is, really, knowing that the person didn't think through this, I said, where are you going to get the card? A store. What store? Now they're thinking. A Hallmark store. Really, where's that? It's down the road. When do you go buy it? Well, actually, I go the other direction. Well, how far away is it? It's 10 minutes. Oh, so you got to go out of your way 20 minutes to get the card. You have a stamp? Yeah. Where? In my office. Where? I guess I don't have a stamp. Oh, how are you going to get a stamp? Now, notice I'm just asking questions. What I'm actually doing is I'm cueing them to answer the questions. I'm actually making thinking easier. By me asking, this doesn't look like an accommodation, but me asking the question is actually helping them to think through the individual steps that they need in order to go get the card. The model helps begin to understand how having somebody ask you questions is actually an accommodation. So when you understand it, you can sit there and say, I'm having a hard time with this task. Can you ask me questions about what's doing? Because that will help me think through what I need to do. Because people get overwhelmed when they put the list, but it's actually thinking through everything that they need to do in order to get that done. And the model helps people bring tangibility to it so they can see it. So with the Post-it issue, she put the Post-it, but she didn't think, do I actually go and look at it on a realistic basis? She didn't think through the execution of that. Then we started talking about what she was really going to do, and it got to be a little bit more difficult, and she actually came up with something. So this is a very subtlety, and people are kind of going, oh my God, but it literally, it illuminates little things like that, where you begin to realize how much ADHD is a thinking impairment. Then you begin to realize accommodations, like just having somebody ask you questions actually helps a person, not everybody, with ADHD think through some things. Having somebody do that stuff can make it cognitively easier, as opposed to when thinking's really, really difficult, there's an urge to go escape to do something else because it's difficult. So again, the program is designed to help people to kind of see that from the inside out and begin to problem solve.
So they see it, so they don't necessarily, after finishing the program, need someone to ask them the questions because they have the thinking and the forethought to problem solve themselves. Is that correct?
It might be like, hey, I recognize, hey, Brooke, you got a couple minutes? I need to send a birthday card. Can you ask me questions about what I need to do in order to send it? Like they can just go to a stranger and like, this is a very simplified version of it, but they'll know is, oh, I'm having a problem with this task. I know an accommodation would have somebody ask me questions. I can go reach out to them and say, ask me. You have to be careful. You have to understand, don't ask people to give you your opinion, but I just need somebody to ask me questions, because when they do that, that makes the thinking easier. So if I got something I'm procrastinating on, that I'm putting off, sometimes just having somebody ask you questions can make it 1,000 times easier, because by them asking the questions and cueing you, they're leading you through thinking
Unlocks
process.
your thinking.
So as a coach, Brooke, a lot of times asking people questions and they're actually thinking their way through it while you're on the phone because you're cueing them. You're the accommodation. Now, sometimes you're asking
Mm-hmm.
insightful questions, but I know there's people that come on every once in a while where you're kind of not coaching, you're just asking them the questions and they're getting there on their own. Other times you're asking probing questions for them to get the self-awareness of what's going on. But literally,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times it's just as simple as the person realize, I just need to have somebody ask questions in that realm. There's lots of other spinoffs with regard to it.
Gotcha. So that's one of the spin-offs to
Yep.
it to help with the executive function of potentially like working memory or initiation. So that is something that someone can walk
Yep.
away with and say, okay, this accommodation
Yep.
is something that I need in life when I get
Yep.
stuck and overwhelmed.
And let's just take this. This is what the model does: is having somebody ask you questions as an accommodation is not it's not mainstream. It's not. You don't see that on the list of accommodations. But again, it's cognitive ergonomics. As we're going through this, and people begin to understand it and say, my working memory is impaired. As an accommodation, I need, like, my eyesight's impaired. If I get glasses, I need somebody to ask me questions. So now they get that. The model will help them understand it in a black and white. And like, I get that. Now you can go advocate because I know that it works by asking somebody just to ask me questions. And so earlier we
Okay.
talked about this being a tool. It's really an observational training program because radiologists who look at CAT scans, MRIs, X-rays, ultrasounds, they have to go through specialized training to become proficient at reading those images. The program is a training program to teach you to become proficient at using attention scope to recognize Dr. Barkley's model in order to be able to problem solve. Now, when I originally did it with the first couple of pilots, I thought it was just going to explain it. But what's fascinating to me, just with the knowledge of what's happening, people start to activate in the 6th of a 14 call series. Just off of understanding it, they're actually then seeing their own world, and without coaching and without prompting, they're actually beginning to apply some of that stuff to their real world. So that tangibility takes the emotions out, and that's what kind of makes it fun.
So is there any sort of sample that people can try this out, a modulation of it, so people can get a feel for what this might look like?
Well, actually, part of the training program is I'm changing your conceptual understanding of how you even approach ADHD. You're coming at it from, oh, I have a microscope. I'm looking for viruses and bacteria. You got to understand what you're looking for when that happens. Except for if you want to go make the meal exercise and go through that, I'm simulating it. It's not like it's a crystal clear picture, but I'm putting you in experience, and you can begin to see the executive functions I've defined as we begin to make them tangible, and you understand, you see how functionally something works. You can begin to see what's possible. Like if you weren't guessing at what works, and you could actually say, oh, I can pinpoint if I have the ability just to talk out loud to somebody, because nonverbal working memory is an executive function. As an accommodation, many people with ADHD have to say the words. If they don't say the words, they're not thinking the words. So if they're talking out loud to somebody else, then often they'll problem solve on their own. So by understanding that and realizing that there's a cognitive reason that we prove with Dr. Barkley's model, and that's the accommodation, and you begin to see that you've been doing it your entire life. Oh, I just have to do it the way that I've instinctively been doing it. Yes. So that's another way that, like, talking out loud, people with ADHD that talk a lot, they weren't taught to talk a lot. They've done it because they're rewarded with higher levels of performance. We're just saying, this is the model. This would explain why you do that. I can't get you not to do it. But now that you know it, you need to ask for permission, or actually ask for those accommodations to have that in your world, because it's just like an accommodation, like the glasses. And for some that get that, the program's black and white enough where it gives them the validity, and they feel comfortable to ask for the accommodations when they were more self-conscious about it before, because they felt it. The program, we kind of prove it, so it changes the emotions around it.
That's what I was going to ask you, because the person, I would think, needs the confidence to then ask, but you're saying it does change the emotions while you're going through it.
So if I'm working with somebody and I'm like, you notice that you talk a lot, or you notice that you think better when somebody's asking you questions, well, go implement it. Don't take my word for it. Go do it. If you do it and it works, as my mom said, success solves a lot of problems. if the model explains it and you apply it and it works, people are, hell, that works. Again, it gives you that confidence to ask for what's necessary for you to actually go do that. The program also begins to give you a language when you're going to a neurotypical to say, yeah, I don't really advocate disclosing ADHD, but if you say I have a working memory problem, I can think a lot better if somebody's just asking me questions. That's what I need. Then we've explained it to you with Dr. Barkley's model. You understand what's going on. We've given you the language to explain it to other people and then ask what you're looking for in a non-ADHD way. It can be really powerful to take the pressure off. Oh, I get it. I understand that it works. I can just ask it this way in natural form. And it again, that's the power of it.
Yeah, it's like a low cost accommodation
Yep.
is what people call it. You don't have to
Yep.
disclose that you have ADHD, but you're using language to help you with some of the dysfunction.
If I may, I want to go back to the beginning of it. I appreciate you letting me come on. For some of you, you're going, oh my God, this is wow. For the engineers, and I'm talking about Six Sigma, you're going, oh my God. But the bottom line is, I wanted the opportunity to explain this so people can judge it on its own merit. I'm saying it's not for everybody, but for those that think they get it, it can be powerful.
Yeah, it sounds it. So, Jeff, if someone is interested in this, and just to clarify, is this only for adults or is it for students as well?
Definitely adults. For younger students, I'd say 16 and under, no, because they're like, forgive me, but when you're going through puberty, as I was upset with my 14-year-old son one time, and I'm like, I was kind of yelling at him, and I realized like he's going through puberty. He's got hormones, and he's going through this metamorphosis. He's intoxicated. I'm trying to talk to a drunk right now, like their sense of warp. So it's not really good. If you got a mature 19 or 20-year-old, or maybe late college, where they have enough self-awareness and they're like they actually want and understand that they need help, it would work. The rest of it, probably not. It can help with the parent understand what's going on, and it can help with the parent in a school system better understand accommodations that their kid might need and give them language to go talk to the school. It doesn't mean that the experts at the school are going to adopt it, because saying my son needs somebody asking him questions is not a normal accommodations. Again, we're discovering accommodations with this model that are non-existent, but we are able to do.
But you know what? Teachers are taught to ask questions using Bloom's taxonomy.
But and forgive me, because that was probably a bad one, in as much as I don't know. But the walking in and saying my son needs a certain period of time where they're sitting down and do that, maybe that's happening. But there's like even one of the big impairments with that's in schools is what I call toggling. When I was in school, I would read stuff on like a book that was highlighted. I didn't have to read all the other words. I just what was highlighted was the target. I would read that, and my eyes would look over at my notes, and I would try to reconcile the two. In the world today, highlighting is hard, so you're reading all this other stuff and trying to filter and grab what you've got. Then you've got to click on another tab or browser or PowerPoint or whatever, and you're holding this information and you're starting to scroll looking for what you're doing. Now, when I gave you the 6 words and asked you to repeat it back in alphabetical order, I think you forgot 1 or 2. Cognitively going from one screen and scrolling down to the other is a cognitive load and impairment. And a lot of times students are being asked to use tools that are cognitively more taxing. And to be able to walk in and articulate that and said, no, my son needs a printer for these types of things, or some other things that we start to kind of come in where you begin to understand. Or like when I was a kid, when I look at a book or I look at the font, I can assess the workload by the physical characteristics of it. I can't do that with a link. And so a lot of times with schools, there's links and stuff all over, but it's not quantified in a way that the person can digest it. So you click on some of those links and it's overwhelming, and sometimes it's relatively short. Well, the overwhelming ones that are, wow, like I don't want to go there because I don't want to feel that. By understanding that emotional reaction that they're having, you can begin to do workarounds in order to deal with somebody so that they can have a better idea what the workload looks like. Again, this is foreign type stuff for a lot of people that are listening, but in the workplace, people have multiple screens. I've seen more and more in schools where they got iPads and stuff like that, but the mere device that they're having sometimes is the impairment, not the tip, trick, or strategy, because of the taxed working memory. And so a lot of times the
Mhm.
program will help parents get a language in order to be able to walk in and not guess, have a better idea of watching their kid and knowing what works.
Sure. So I want to call you the doctor of attention, coming up with a scope. And if someone wants to learn more about the attention scope, where would they go?
If they go to my website, digcoaching.com, and look at services, there's a drop down with cognitive ergonomics. If you go on that page, there's a white paper that you can take a look at. And then there's also a webinar that I did with a PowerPoint informational session that goes more methodically kind of through the program. I would encourage them to go check that out first, because again, I don't want anybody signing up for this unless you actually think that this makes a lot of sense. If you don't, then don't. But I would encourage them to go check those things out, and then they can take a look at the program to see if it makes some sense. And if you don't think this makes any sense in the world, there's no problem. But I'm just excited because it's a completely different way to take a look at ADHD, and I'm just trying to educate people that there's a new alternative. And I'm just grateful that you gave me the opportunity to try to share that with the.
Oh my gosh, of course. I'm all about helping the
Yep.
neurodivergent community. And in this scope that you've come up with, it's not only helping the neurodivergent community, it sounds like it could help pretty much anybody. The fact that you've created this new thing is awesome, just to add that in and create that lens for people in a way that
Thank
they
you.
have not been able to see their executive functions before.
It's kind of exciting. So anyway, I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff, thank you so much again for coming on Successful with ADHD. And for those of you who want to learn more about Jeff Copper, please go to dig, coaching with a G.com. And Jeff, you're worldwide, right?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again. And I'm sure this will not be the last time Jeff is on Successful with ADHD. And we can't wait to hear more about the attention scope and the cognitive ergonomics.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Successful with ADHD. I hope it helps you on your journey. And if you need any additional support for you or a loved one with ADHD, feel free to reach out to us at coachingwithbrooke.com and all social media platforms at Coaching with Brooke. And remember, it's Brooke with an E. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.